Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cabot. My name's Casey Sword. I'm the executive director here. Thanks for you all for clapping for me. Thank you. Just very pleased to have everybody here tonight for our October community conversation. This month's topic is gun control, which is a very important topic to our community. And we started this series as we were just reopening after the pandemic, and it's been really wonderful for us to be able to host important topics in our community with the background of our beautiful historic theater. And we love to open up this theater to the community. Many of you tonight are friends and members, and for those of you who are here with us for the first time, we welcome you and we hope to see you again. We love this series, Community Conversations. It will be happening monthly through April. So if you like what you heard tonight, if you want to come out to more of these, you can take a look at our website for upcoming community conversations. We also do films, events, and all kinds of great stuff. And we also have a beautiful comedy club right down the street called Off Cabot, Comedy and Events, where we also do a variety of events. So we thank you for your support of the Cabot and for your support of this event. And we look forward to having a great discussion tonight. Now I want to invite our co-sponsor of the event, Leading Ladies, and Therese Meldon from Leading Ladies is going to take you into the program. So thanks, folks, and enjoy the conversation.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Casey. Leading Ladies is very pleased to be coordinating and co-sponsoring tonight's event. As a nonpartisan activist group headquartered on the North Shore, Leading Ladies is committed to fighting issues that adversely affect women and families. These include, but are not limited to, homelessness, food insecurity, unequal access to quality health care and education, and gun violence. The index cards that you were given when you came in are for your questions to the panel. We'll collect them during the program. Before we begin our discussion with some experts on gun safety and gun control legislation, we want to share some videos with you. The first is just 3 minutes long and produced by the Council on Foreign Affairs. It offers many facts and statistics to set the stage for our later discussion. Okay, that's a lot of information to take in, I know. The next short video we want to share is called Generation Lockdown. It is disturbing, but presents the reality that today's school children face.
All right, so good morning. Welcome to today's team building event. Today, we're going to be learning what to do in the event of an active shooter. We're gonna bring in a special guest. She's actually an expert on this, and she's going to be leading our team building event. This is Kaylee.
If there was an active shooter, you'd all be dead. When you talk out loud, the shooter can tell where you are and where you're hiding. Sometimes we play the game who can stay quietest the longest, so we all remember. You can try and protect your friends by pushing the tables and chairs against the doors. You also have to put a piece of paper over the door window so they can't see in. And you can't cry. It gives away your position and your hiding spot. And if you're in the bathrooms, you have to stand on the toilet seat and crunch down so they can't see your feet and they can't see your head, so they don't know that you're in there.
That's crazy.
Try to listen for things that could help the police. For example, if you hear a lot of bangs like bang, 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 the shooter might be down the hall. Or if you hear louder ones like bang, 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 he could be right outside your door. If the shooter comes in the room, screaming won't do anything. You have to try and fight back. If you can't escape, we get taught the emergency window escape plan, where you have to break a window, put clothes over the frame, and climb through. Our teacher used to sing a song to make it easy to remember. Lock down, let's all hide. Lock the doors and stay inside. Crouch on down, don't make a sound, and don't cry or you'll be found.
Okay, and now for our keynote address, we're thrilled to show you an interview with David Hogg, survivor of the Parkland, Florida school shooting and co-founder of March for Our Lives. Since graduating from Harvard last spring, David has devoted himself full-time to working as an activist and advocate for gun control. Although he couldn't be here tonight in person, we were able to interview him specifically for this event, and we'll now show you that interview.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily with March for Our Lives. I'm our social media manager and creative, and I'm here with David Hogg. You want to introduce yourself, David?
Hey everyone, I'm David. I'm a co-founder of March for Our Lives. I'm from Parkland and happy to be with you all today.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So we're going to kick it off with a few questions here. First question that we have at the Cabot is, it's been 5.5 years since the mass shooting at Parkland in Florida. What federal wins would you say have been made by March for Our Lives and youth activists since then to curtail gun violence?
Yeah, well, federally, it's been very hard to get anything passed because of the archaic filibuster that stops us from being able to make real progress in the major obstacle to preventing passing life-saving legislation, which is the Senate, and the fact that we need to not just have a majority, but over 60 votes to be able to actually pass anything. But despite that, we've still been able to pass. We've still worked on several pretty significant pieces of legislation. In 2018, the most significant stuff that we worked on were changes to the Dickey Amendment, which was the law that basically said that it was illegal to study the effectiveness of state gun laws at all, and had a chilling effect on the research field for preventing gun violence, where many public health researchers, for fear of retaliation or not being able to advance their careers, would simply not study gun violence at all. Unfortunately, I think that played a significant role in gun violence becoming one of the leading causes of death for young people between the ages of 0 and 19. But thankfully, we were able to change that amendment to make it so that the CDC and NIH could fund gun violence research. Just for context, sepsis kills about the same number of people every year as guns do in the United States. However, sepsis gets about $1.8 billion in research funding annually from the United States federal government, whereas gun violence, despite killing roughly the same number of people, gets approximately now, for a long time it was $0 a year essentially, but now it's closer to 25 or $50 million typically in a year. And that's part of what March for Our Lives advocated for. More recently, after the Uvalde shooting, we organized 400 marches after Uvalde and brought tens of thousands of people with us to Washington, D.C. to demand action. And we were able to pass the first federal gun law in 30 years. And it wasn't as much as I would have liked, but it still was progress. It gave billions of dollars in funding to mental health, school safety, and different programs to help prevent gun violence, as well as expanding background checks for people that are under the age of 21 that buy semi-automatic rifles. On top of that, we recently created the Office of Gun Violence Prevention at the White House to help implement many of the features of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to make sure that that money is being spent appropriately and that all levels of government, state, federal, and local are coordinated in their response to gun violence. And that had been something that March for Our Lives had been calling for the past 5 years, essentially, and it's finally been created.
Yeah. And I know we were just talking about how we've had like a lot of snowballing of like once we've had one thing happen federally, then we're able to open more doors there. So what would you say is the most important federal legislation that you could single out right now that we need Congress to unite on to stop gun violence?
I think the single best thing that we could do to prevent further gun violence or act on gun violence is to repeal the industry protection that the gun industry has from liability. You know, a major component of what took down big tobacco was that people could bring class action lawsuits and legal action in general against the tobacco industry. Unfortunately, the gun industry is immune to pretty much any lawsuit brought against them by somebody who's been impacted by gun violence. And it stops the free market forces from being able to hold the industry accountable. You know, I think if you're a gun company that, you know, says that you only want to sell guns to responsible gun owners, that's great, but let's make sure that there's a major financial incentive to make sure that you're only selling it to the most responsible people in the first place. Because frankly, if you sell your gun, a gun that you've manufactured to somebody like the shooter at my high school, who is known to have a history of mental illness, is known to have been making threats against a school, and was at the time 19 years old, and they go out and murder people with that weapon, I don't think any firearms company should be able to exist that allows something like that to happen, because they should have ensured that there was a thorough background check in the first place. And this puts the onus on the industry rather than the individual to make sure that they are being as responsible as possible in the first place.
Totally. I know in California, we actually just had some laws passed that are focusing on holding the gun industry accountable. And I know we just talked about this, but because of the creation of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, what are your hopes for its success? And what evidence is there that this office has some real power for pursuing and some change?
Well, my hope with this office is that we can really help coordinate the federal resources that are already out there to make sure that they're being used in the best way possible to address gun violence. The reality is this, that, you know, prior to this office being created, March for Our Lives and myself had many conversations at the White House where people would say, you know, this is obviously one issue that we very much care about, but they also have 10 other issues, including things like climate, things like labor, things like all these other topics around domestic policy that the same people have to focus on. And the reality is, as gun violence is the leading cause of death for children in America, it is the leading cause of death of our future. And we can't have people that are trying to focus on 18 things at once. We need one person focusing on one thing at one time, which is gun violence prevention. And I think my great hope for this office is that it can, without even needing to pass any new gun laws, we can still reduce gun deaths by simply using the resources that are there right now that are not being utilized to their full potential in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the greatest threat against our children, our generation right now. I know that as a founder of March for Our Lives, this has been a big focus for you, but lately you've also worked on the PAC Leaders We Deserve. What is your hope with Leaders We Deserve, and like, what are your hopes that it'll achieve within that org?
Yeah, Leaders We Deserve is a PAC and super PAC dedicated to electing young people around the country. The long and short of what we try to do is we're trying to be like the Emily's List, but for young people under the age of 35 for Congress and under the age of 30 for state legislatures. Our entire focus here is to give young people the resources that they need in lean red to purple states that they need to succeed in the first place. Because oftentimes young people have a large political network from, you know, years of activism, for example, whether it be with March for Our Lives, whether it be with the environmental movement, the women's movement, or the movement for racial justice. But they lack one of the most important things, unfortunately, that you need in politics, which is funding. what we come in and do is bring in early money to these races to help get the ball rolling, help get them to be taken seriously early on. And we do that by focusing on open blue seat primaries where a Democratic incumbent is not running again and it's a safe Democratic seat. We work there to help elect young people there. And then after the primary season is over, we go and focus on more competitive races in the general election where young people are running. Our organization is unique in that we don't try to focus on electing 100 people. We're really trying to focus on electing 15 to 30 charismatic, the most charismatic, smart, and brilliant young people of our generation from these social movements around the country, because we really don't want to spread ourselves too thin. There are many people who say that they, have supported young people, that have tried to say that they supported campaigns that I've worked on in the past. But, when you're trying to support 1,000 people at once, it can be more challenging. And there's a lot of potential at the state level to help stop the worst legislation that is happening around the country right now, where even if we break supermajorities, we can stop a lot of that legislation. And by investing in these young people, they can start to gain the experience that they need to become very successful. It can be easy to forget or hard to even believe, but President Biden was 29 when he was first elected to the Senate. And I think the reason he's been the most successful president in my lifetime, and I don't say that lightly, is because he started when he was 29 years old. And that's what we're trying to do with these young people, is to get them involved now so that we can have people in office that understand the anxiety of what it's like to go through a school shooter drill. So that we can have people in office that know the anxiety of what it's like not knowing if your planet is going to be inhabitable for your children. And that's why we're going to work right now. Absolutely.
Harnessing youth power right now is an untapped power that I think a lot of people outside of our generation just don't realize, that the sky is not the limit for us. And so thinking about, as a Massachusetts resident, and as you used to live in Massachusetts, this is something that you definitely have focused on before. We have stronger gun safety laws, as you know, than many other states in the US. And so a lot of Massachusetts residents don't really know what we can do, and what we can do to affect things more on a federal level, or should we focus statewide? So what do you think the average Massachusetts resident should focus on to make an impact? Would it be more so locally or nationally, or a combination?
I think there are two things that Massachusetts residents can do to help combat gun violence and have an impact. One, Massachusetts has some of the best gun laws in the country, but there's still people that die in Massachusetts from gun violence, unfortunately. And until there is a day when nobody, or a year when nobody dies from gun violence, we can't stop working. Part of the reason why gun violence continues in Massachusetts, despite having stronger gun laws, is because of weak federal laws, right? Where you can simply go to New Hampshire or Maine or a state with weaker gun laws and bring them across state lines into Massachusetts. And fortunately, there is a chance to do something about that, especially in the case of New Hampshire. They're very close to getting a new majority there that supports things like gun safety and protecting abortion rights. And there is an election coming up, and we need people to go and work on those races, to volunteer and raise money for those candidates to help do that. So I would say those are the two things that Massachusetts residents can do best. You can also support March for Our Lives by going to marchforourlives.com/donate.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking part in this little interview with us today. But what would you say is your most important message you'd like to leave with our audience here in Beverly, Mass tonight?
To not focus so much on the negative sides of what happens if we don't succeed, if we don't win, but think really positively about what can happen and what good we can do when we do win. And to make sure that, when there are states like Massachusetts, where, it's pretty much one party that largely controls the entire state legislature, that party is held accountable to their promises and make sure that, we act on them. Frankly, it always has really bothered me that, I went to a school with an endowment of, I think, over $50 billion, but I walked past the same homeless people every day on the street in the freezing cold in Cambridge. And, if there is a state where there are many politicians that claim to be against homelessness, that claim to want to make sure that people are able to be housed and protected from all things like gun violence or climate change or whatever it might be, it's not enough simply to say that you care. We need to be sure that we're holding our own elected officials, no matter their party, accountable to their promises and acting on them in the first place. Well, frankly, we're just hypocrites.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super busy with your new PAC and with everything going on as we're ramping up for elections. So thanks so much for answering some questions with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you to David and the staff at March for Our Lives who made this interview possible. To hear from someone who survived a mass shooting and is now in the front lines working for gun control feels like being privy to a remarkably reliable source, one that can be trusted and is worth listening to. We will now move on to our panel discussion, but first, let me introduce our moderator. Elizabeth Kilcoyne is a writer and campaign coach living on the North Shore. She served as a select person from 2004 to 2010 in Ipswich, was adjunct faculty at Suffolk University for 18 years, and is retired deputy comptroller for Massachusetts. Elizabeth managed Representative Kristen Kastner's 2022 campaign in the 2nd Essex District when Kristen won by just 1 vote. Elizabeth believes that in order to improve gun safety, abortion access, and equality for all people, we must elect legislators who support these issues. Please welcome Elizabeth Kilcoyne.
Good evening. We're going to have a discussion here tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. Massachusetts has the lowest firearm death rate in the country. In 2021, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that 3.4 out of 100,000 people die each year from gun violence. That represents 247 people in Massachusetts that we know and love, and that's too high. Gun violence is a serious public health problem, and you've heard that in the videos tonight. We are fortunate to live in a state that cares about people and respects firearm ownership. Last Wednesday, the Massachusetts House of Representatives passed House Bill 4139, an act modifying firearm laws. This was a big win for Massachusetts. The bill now goes to the Senate for consideration. Tonight, we will hear from 4 of our leading local activists who will help us understand this bill and what we as citizens can do to improve people's lives. In addition to the people who we lose to gun violence, it's the people left behind without a daughter or son or mother or father, and those who are survivors of gun violence that suffer as well. We will also hear from you tonight. What questions or concerns do you have about this bill? Or what you can do to prevent gun violence? Please write your questions on the cards as we pass them out on your way in. And if you don't have one, just raise your hand. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists. Massachusetts Representative Marjorie Decker. Marjorie. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. You're doing it. Okay. She's from Cambridge, served as a Cambridge City Councilor for 14 years prior to being elected to the legislature in 2013. She is the chairperson of the Joint Committee on Public Health and a leading advocate for gun control in the legislature. This session, Representative Decker has filed 4 gun-related bills that are reflected in the House Bill 4139 that passed last Wednesday. They include registering ghost guns, enhancing extreme risk protective order, also known as the red flag law, expanding locations where firearms are not allowed, and data collection on gun-related crimes. Welcome. John Rosenthal from Gloucester, right here, co-founded Stop Gun Violence nearly 30 years ago in 1994, and is a responsible gun owner. The group advocates personal responsibility, public awareness, stronger legislation, increased gun manufacturer responsibility, and strict law enforcement. A quote from John: "Gun violence is a uniquely American public health and safety crisis. No other developed country intentionally allows unrestricted access to easily concealed handguns and military-style assault weapons." Welcome. Welcome, John. Rebecca O'Brien from West Newbury is a leader in the organization Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, the largest grassroots organization in America fighting for public safety. Rebecca leads the statewide Mass Call Together team. She is passionate about getting people elected on the North Shore who support gun safety. This year, she was involved in 3 state representative races that were successful, and she is an ambassador for Congressman Seth Moulton. Welcome. And we have Emily Rubio from Salem, Massachusetts, is a leader in the youth organization March for Our Lives. You met Emily in the video with David Hogg, who founded the organization with his classmates from Parkland, Florida. Emily works with chapters of March for Our Lives across the country to let America know that children and teenagers don't want to grow up worrying about active shooters in their schools. Emily, welcome. Representative Decker, thank you for the work you have done and accomplished in the legislature leading up to this bill regarding the ghost guns, the red flag law, and others. Your leadership role in ensuring this bill passed is well appreciated. Please give us the highlights of this legislation and how you hope it will save lives in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so honored to be joined by all of you on this stage and for what you represent. I also want to say thank you for sending us, both of you, for helping to send us some really great colleagues and legislators. I want to acknowledge that we have Representative Jerry Paracella, who's the state rep for many of you here, for what an incredible friend and colleague he is. He's here somewhere. Thank you for sending Jerry, first of all. And I just said to Rep. Kastner, is this your second term? And she's reminding me it's her first term. We sit next to each other. She's on my committee for public health. We share an office. And let me tell you, you sent somebody who already feels like a seasoned pro. So thank you for sending her as well. So I came into this work almost 12 years ago. And I was just coming home from our orientation for new reps at UMass, and my colleague, my new colleague, someone who I just become friends with, who is now the ambassador to Ireland for the US, she calls me up and said, "Did you hear just what happened?" while I'm driving home. And I hadn't. Well, the massacre at Sandy Hook had just happened while we were driving back from UMass Amherst from orientation. And we're just stunned, and we're both moms, and we're both new legislators, and it was this idea of what do we do? And what we did was we learned the power of what people can do who legislate. And working with then Speaker DeLeo, and it's really, I've known John in a few iterations, but I think I was one of the few people who didn't know him through this work. I knew him through other things. And having John at the State House working with Speaker DeLeo and a task force that spent the next year, and there was pressure to get this done faster, but they were really methodical and thinking through what could Massachusetts do to continue to make us a safer state, with the hope that once we did this, other states would follow suit. So I just want to say, before I get into what the bill does, firearms are one of the leading, it is the leading cause of deaths for young people, surpassing car accidents and cancer. That is not true in other countries. And John's going to be, I love listening to John because he reminds us of what it used to look like when we actually had a Congress that took common sense, responsible gun ownership laws seriously, and what it looks like today. Today, we have so far, the year hasn't ended, so far in this country, 500, what do we call mass shootings. And a mass shooting is, unfortunately, probably many of you know, because I didn't 12 years ago, it's when 4 people have been confirmed dead from one shooter. 500. Other comparable countries, European countries, 1, 3, 4, and I think 8 might be the largest. 500. So this bill today that we just passed last week, it's significant because what it has meant is that, particularly in the House of Representatives where I proudly serve, we've had Speaker DeLeo and now Speaker Mariano, who when he came into office as Speaker from Majority Leader, the first thing he said was that this was going to be a priority of his. And kind of the way this works sometimes in the legislature is, oh, we already did X, Y, and Z on that issue, so we take a break for a couple of years. That's not been the case when it has come to looking at gun violence and gun homicides. And Massachusetts continues to keep our foot on the gas. And I want to also remind people that the polling data shows that most gun owners who are lawful, responsible, actually support what we do, which is why we've had overwhelming votes in being able to do this. So quickly, I'll just go through this. You mentioned 4 parts that I worked on. I want to say that I filed 4 bills. I worked very closely with Chairman Day, who is Chair of Judiciary, who held 11 listening sessions around the state. So while 4 of my bills are in this, to be very clear, this bill is the result of Chairman Day going throughout the Commonwealth, meeting with House colleagues in every corner of Massachusetts, inviting constituents who support this and who don't support this to come and have a conversation about what their hopes and their fears are. And so I'm really proud that I've been able to play a role in this, but this bill really is the culmination of the majority of legislators in Massachusetts who worked with Speaker Mariano and Chairman Day to make it possible to continue to make sure that we continue to have the lowest gun homicide rates in the country, but of no consolation to the 247 families so far who are grieving in our state. So, ghost guns. When I filed this bill in 2018, it was written with me and my police commissioner of Cambridge. Our police commissioner and I wrote this bill because after 75 packages had been delivered to one home from a gun manufacturer, the postal carrier had the good sense and due diligence to reach out to the Cambridge Police Department, and what they found out was this person who was not licensed to carry in Massachusetts, in his home, and this is less than a mile from where I live, 28 handguns that had been assembled, 3 assault weapons, and enough gun parts which were not identifiable or traceable for 25 more guns, along with bulletproof vests and ammunition. So we now have, in the bill that the House just passed, we've actually made it so that you have to register all guns that are made. So you cannot build a gun and not be licensed in Massachusetts and you have to register that gun, and you have to have a traceable, identifiable serial number on that. And if the gun has been made by plastics or 3D printing, then that printable serial number has to be metal so it can be detected through gun detectors. ERPO, we did incredible work. Many of you I met when I was, again, through circumstances, I happened to be my bill that was filed in the same year of the massacre that occurred at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where David Hogg was a student at the time. That was the red flag bill that many of you came and you worked the halls of democracy in Massachusetts, and we passed that bill in 2018. What we just did last week was we updated that. So if you or your loved one currently, before this law passes, suspected somebody in your home or in your relationship was going to hurt themselves, because remember, a lot of this was about suicide prevention. But if you believed someone was going to hurt themselves or they were going to hurt someone else, you now have an extreme risk, you can get an extreme risk protection order to go to the judge, who will temporarily remove. And in fact, many Republicans who'd never voted for a gun bill before, for a lot of reasons, they worked on this bill because the due process actually made a lot more sense in being able to get your gun and and make a case for whether or not, in fact, you should be separated. Prior to that, it was your police chief that had to decide, what do they think? What's the relationship? What's the risk? Now the bill is expanded to include your providers, your employers, and other folks and other people who know you and who love you. Going on to one of the bills that I filed would have prevented being able to carry a gun into public spaces, like, a library, state house. January 6th for me changed everything, and understanding that there are people who not only do they want to disrupt the democratic process, but they believe it's actually okay to violently actually try to disrupt the democratic process. As an elected official, as a librarian, as anyone in a public space, we shouldn't have to be worried that somebody wants to come in and actually either intimidate us with a gun or actually really hurt us with a gun. So we've actually, in the House bill, it now means that you cannot also, you also can't go into someone's home without claiming and making it clear that you have a gun. These are the exemptions that we made. We exempted off and on-duty police officers and law enforcement. And then I will say that the data collection. The state of Massachusetts has been collecting data on illegal guns that have been caught and handguns that have been collected, but we haven't been using that data to translate how are we actually making sure we understand where guns are coming from, and are we putting in our resources into the right places. So we're now going to actually not only keep collecting the data, we're going to start interpreting the data. And then I will say finally, an amendment that I was really proud of is that in this legislation that was filed by Chair Day and Chair Mikowitz from Ways and Means, it also creates a special legislative commission where we're going to study where we put our dollars to do violence prevention around gun use and gun homicides. An amendment that I was able to get in there working with the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which was founded by Tina Sherry, whose son was killed at the age of 19 and works with survivors, is to make sure now that survivors and survivor organizations have representation on that commission as well. Finally, I will just say that a few other things that this bill goes on to do, as if, I'm hoping you're feeling really proud of your state right now. We go on to actually say that the kind of training that new gun owners who are trying to people who are trying to get licensed to carry and to own, that the training that they receive, wherever they receive that training, we will now, that training will be universal. So whether you get the training in the South Shore, the North Shore, the Berkshires, that training, and that we've left it up to the state police to promulgate language to talk about what that universal training should look like. We've also consolidated a lot of our gun laws just to make them consistent, so that they are consistent with federal law and state laws, and just kind of cleaned up a lot of inconsistencies that are that currently existed. And I believe that covers anything. If it doesn't, I'll come back to you. But just to finally say that you live in a state that cares deeply about you, and that we believe every life is precious, and that we know this is not inevitable. Our statistic is not inevitable. And so thank you for your interest, your efforts, and your advocacy, and for being here.
Thank you. John, you're next. So this is a very large, comprehensive bill, and there are issues that residents are concerned about because they either don't understand the bill or because they have received misinformation about what's in the bill. And I have some examples here, but you should feel free to, expand on anything that is important to you. One of the sort of rumors going around is that the bill prohibits a law-abiding gun owner with a license to carry from bringing their gun into a retail shop. Can you give us some Comments on that?
Sure. Every time I do one of these kind of events, and it's been since really 1994, which, if you, on average, 35,000 dead a year, that is over 1.5 million Americans. That it's more Americans killed by gun violence in this country since 1975 than all U.S. servicemen and women killed in all foreign wars combined. Just to give you a sense. And 131 people that woke up this morning will be dead from firearms, including 8 to 9 kids. There is a mass shooting going on somewhere in America because there's at least 2 every day. And now, children, guns are the leading cause of death for our children. There is no other country, there is no other species that knowingly allows the death of their children and their future. The future of America are our kids, and our Congress regulates toy guns but don't regulate real guns. And I often think about, when we start these conversations, let's just do a quick little refresher, because you always hear this question that, gun, and I'm a gun owner. I've been a gun owner my whole adult life. It's a really inherently dangerous product that you should be trained and you should store safely, and you should have a background check for. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And up until 2008, every court, including every attorney general for every president, acknowledged it was the right to have a militia, which is the National Guard. That changed in 2008 with the D.C. Heller case. But Justice Scalia wrote for the narrow 5-4 majority. He said, you can't ban guns in the common use of the founders. Black powder single shot. And he said, I don't mean, he parenthetically said this, I don't mean assault weapons. They didn't exist. Then he goes on to say, like all rights, they're not unlimited. And you can put reasonable restrictions on how firearms are sold and owned. So that's the context. For this bill, that is the context for the 4 bills that came before it, 3 out of 4 signed by Republican governors here in the Commonwealth. What we do here in the Commonwealth is we treat inherently dangerous firearms like inherently dangerous automobiles. It is pretty much the same process. We require safety training. We require renewable licensing. You can't own a tank, and far more people are killed with assault weapons than tanks in America. And with that licensing comes discretion, because police chiefs know their residents. And if you sell a gun in this state, you have to sell it to someone who is licensed, or you're responsible. What this bill does is it now fills really dangerous loopholes. Where's the sense? So we also became the first state in the nation to regulate firearms as a consumer product, because the National Consumer Product Safety Commission regulates teddy bears, regulates toy guns, regulates 15,000 consumer items. But they're prohibited from regulating the real firearm that last year resulted in 48,000 dead and over 100,000 injured. So we have by looking at, how car deaths have come down, we've basically brought the same tools to how gun deaths can be prevented and reduced. Since 1994 in the Commonwealth, we have reduced the rate of gun deaths by 40%. We are an urban state with the lowest gun death rate in the nation. This is what leadership looks like. And honestly, it is. Do not take for granted for 1 minute that you and your children and your grandchildren live in the safest state in the nation because of the leadership at our State House on a bipartisan basis. And like the Globe editorialized, if every state had that same 3.4 per 100,000 firearm fatality rate. We don't ban anything except for assault weapons. Now we're going to be banning ghost guns, and we ban military-style assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition magazines, and we ban cheap guns. But for the most part, any law-abiding gun owner can get the firearm that they want. If every state had the same effective gun laws, low gun death rate, at least the Globe editorialized when there were 45,000 dead in 18, said 27,000 lives saved a year in America. Imagine that. Well, now the gun death rate's up to 48,000. It'll be over 50,000 next year. So we need to replicate our gun laws. We also need to fix some loopholes. So in Massachusetts, gun owners get trained, get licensed, buy a firearm, the firearm is registered. Meanwhile, the firearm cannot be sold in this state without having manufacturing standards that are set by the state. By the way, and I know David well, and my dearest friend's son was killed at Parkland. That assault weapon was made here in Massachusetts by Smith & Wesson. It can't be owned here, it can't be sold here because it falls under our list of banned weapons. Another dear friend whose daughter was killed in Aurora, Colorado at that movie theater by the Joker, made in Massachusetts by Smith & Wesson, can't be sold here, can't be owned here. Columbine High School, Colorado, weapon made in Springfield, Mass, can't be owned and sold here. So one of the bills you didn't hear about is what Marjorie also filed, which is if we can't own and sell these military-style assault weapons in Massachusetts, they shouldn't be made here either, because we're just exporting death elsewhere. Why are people... So here in Massachusetts, why are people allowed to be massacred with weapons that can't be used here? So the serial numbers. It makes no sense whatsoever that if a legitimate firearm is made and it meets our manufacturing standards in Massachusetts, why is it okay then if anyone ships parts, makes it at home, 3D prints it, and has no serial number that can't be traced? So that's just common sense. Now, common sense doesn't really enter into this argument. For instance, Congress says it's perfectly fine to have 30, 40, 100 round magazines while we issue police officers 13 to 15 rounds in their service weapons. You need a license. In this country, you need a license to hunt, and I have hunted. And when you hunt duck, first of all, you need a license, and when you hunt duck, you're limited to 3 rounds, and deer, you're limited to 5 rounds to protect the duck and deer population. When you want to hunt humans, no limit on the number of rounds. So we are leading the way. You can't get an assault weapon here. You can't have more than 10 rounds. At least it's less than police carry. Now you're going to have serial numbers. So, I think it's going to make our state safer. And once again, it's this kind of leadership that is needed nationally.
Wow. I just feel so great right now. Thank you both very much. That was just awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca. I wanted to say, now's the time. If you have a question, you can pass it to the end of the aisle, and we'll collect it, and we'll answer it for you, hopefully.
So there were a few more issues on the bill that you wanted me to comment on, and maybe I didn't address them all. I just want to make sure, because there's a lot of misinformation about this bill. This is an incredibly important bill, and it's been promoted by Speaker Mariano, who don't take for granted, his leadership too, because if it weren't for the leadership in the House, we would not be sitting here talking about another gun bill that will save lives.
Fantastic. There's one here that I think it needs to be addressed. Will this bill take guns away from lawful gun owners in Massachusetts?
The only way that will happen is under the ERPO bill, the Extreme Risk Protection Order. When we often hear, and when we had a hearing at the State House on this gun bill, you often heard, this is just going to be an inconvenience to law-abiding gun owners. Well, that ERPO bill and the improvements to it, so, police and family members and boyfriends and girlfriends, could petition a court, but a mental health professional can't. And what we often hear is, it's not the gun, it's mentally ill people. Well, look, we don't have a lock on mental illness in this country. We do on mass shootings every day. But what we do that's unique is we arm anyone who can breathe without a background check with a history of mental illness can have an easily concealed handgun and a military-style weapon. That makes no sense. So, look, a bunch of folks who are licensed gun owners, like every teenager, including ourselves, who experiences mental illness in their lifetime, law-abiding gun owners might go through a period of serious mental stress, and now, we can temporarily remove a firearm from a, quote, law-abiding licensed gun owner. So, for the most part, our gun laws just make it harder for people who are prohibited. But in this case, this is going to help save the lives of the loved ones, including gun owners in the Commonwealth.
Excellent, thank you. Actually, I will ask you one more now that we're here, and that's the one I mentioned before. People are saying that this bill will prohibit law-abiding gun owners with a license to carry their gun into a retail shop.
So what this does is, with regard to retail shops and other commercial businesses, it's up to the owner of that commercial business. They can post if they don't, I think a bunch of retail chains have posted signs saying, firearms are welcome or firearms aren't welcome. So that's up to the owner of the business. What this does is allow renters and household owners.
Yeah, it's actually a compromise. People aren't wrong. The initial bill as it came out would have prohibited, it would have had to be explicitly stated by the commercial retail owner that guns are allowed. Or you would have actually had to notify the retail owner. The compromise that we just passed in the House is that you can still go in and out of a commercial retail space if you are a licensed gun owner. The retail space can put a sign up saying no guns allowed. They can already do that. So no, right? So the compromise was that it actually took that out. What it does do now is to say that if you were to walk into someone's private residence, you have to have explicit permission. You have to tell them that you have a gun, and then you have to have permission to come in with a gun. Which again, I think most of us want to know if somebody has a gun walking into our home. And informed consent is what I say.
Thank you. Thank you both very much.
And there is a gun in 20 to 30% of homes in Massachusetts, 40% nationwide. So if you have one takeaway as parents and grandparents, make sure before your kids and your grandkids go to houses, even here in Massachusetts, where over 228 people died last year and 688 were injured with firearms, ask, is there a gun in the home and how is it stored?
Yep. Oh, that's a great transition to Rebecca, who, in addition to this fabulous legislation, there are actions that we can take to save lives. And could you share what the work of Moms Demand Action and how we as individuals can get involved in this important movement?
Sure. As she said, microphone. We are the largest grassroots organization in America fighting for gun sense. It was started, we are not just moms, we're dads, uncles, aunts, grandparents, survivors, and educators. We are nonpartisan and we support the Second Amendment, and we want to spread the message that all Americans can and should do more to reduce gun violence. We offer training programs and a lot of tools for people to get involved and a sense of community in our work. Our story started in 2006 with Michael Bloomberg, then the mayor of New York City. He joined with Boston's Mayor Menino to start Mayors Against Illegal Guns. In 2012, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, a mother of 5 in Indiana was so heartbroken and she decided to take action. She started a Facebook group with other moms called Moms Demand Action. When Mayor Bloomberg stepped aside as mayor in 2013, he started focusing more on his gun violence work and hired John Feinblatt as his president, and they started focusing on statistical research, evidence-based solutions, and gun violence prevention programs for disadvantaged communities. Come 2014, John looked at Michael Bloomberg and said, you know what, we need some boots on the ground, and nobody gets anything done like an upset mom. So the two joined forces in 2014, and the Every Town for Gun Sense, the fund was created. As was mentioned, 10 years later, we have 10 million supporters in a chapter in every state. As we talked about, our work is far from over. We're so proud to be here in Massachusetts, leading the way. Again, we lose 120 people a day to gun violence, and it's the leading cause of death for our children. And as I mentioned, Americans are 25 times more likely to die by a gun than in any other peer nation. Elizabeth and I spoke about what can you do. One of the things I learned quickly as a part of Moms Demand Action was the power of being a constituent. There's one thing, you can, of course, this is the most important issue for me, but there's issues that everyone has, and creating a relationship with your, everybody from your school committee members to your town councilors, your state representatives, your state senators, up to federal representatives. Creating that dialogue. In fact, part of the, we have an obligation as voters to do that. Part of the Act Modernizing Firearm Laws, as we mentioned, was the live fire training. Actually, people that were large proponents of that were 2 volunteers with Moms Demand Action here on the North Shore, Greg Gibson and Jackson Brown. They saw that was a need and they helped create it. I think this truly represents our ability as a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. We pass stronger gun laws and work to close the loopholes that jeopardize the safety of our families. We also work in our own communities with business partners to encourage a culture of responsible gun ownership. We know that gun violence is preventable, and we're committed to doing what it takes to keep families safe, as well as protecting the Second Amendment. The easiest way to learn about us and engage with us is to go to momsdemandaction.org. Some of the things we do, we register voters, we support gun sense candidates, advance gun safety legislation, and demand accountability from our legislators. We support survivors through our nationwide Every Town Survivor Network. This network connects survivors to each other, amplifies the power of their voices, and offers trauma-informed programs, information for direct services, and supports survivors who choose to become advocates. We have a Gun Sense Action Network, which is a network of phone bankers you call right from your home. We have the ability to connect voters directly to their legislators with the press of a button. We provide education and awareness about child gun deaths, and responsible gun storage from home. We have a Be Smart program. Secure all guns in your home or vehicles. Model responsible behavior around guns. Ask about the presence of guns in another home. Recognize the role and risk of suicide, and tell your peers, talk to one another about these safety measures that are so important. One of our mission statements is that we really promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization. City gun violence, is most marginalized and underfunded communities are mostly impacted. Mass shootings only account for about 2% of all gun deaths. Our Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience 12 times the gun homicide and 18 times the assault injuries, nearly 3 times fatal police shootings as white Americans. In domestic violence, again, these intersections of where ERPO intersects with the issues of suicide, domestic violence, and mass shootings, there's correlations between people exhibiting behavior. Domestic violence, an average of 70 women die a month. 1 million women have been shot with a gun by a domestic partner, and 4.5 million have reported being threatened by a gun. We need to strengthen state laws and implement and enforce existing laws like we're doing here in Massachusetts. We also need to strengthen the federal background law system and fund comprehensive research about the nexus of domestic violence and guns. Mass shootings. Between 2015 and 2022, over 19,000 people were killed or wounded in mass shooting. 1 in 4 shooters is legally prohibited from possessing a firearm. 32% with 4 or more people are killed and exhibit warning signs. And where an assault weapon was used, there were twice as many people killed. And in more than half of the mass shootings in the last decade, the perpetrator shot a current or former intimate partner of a family member as part of their rampage. Again, we talked about some of the misinformation, and we mentioned, I won't go into all the details, but the fact that Massachusetts does have the lowest rate of gun death in the country. It has only 1.6 homicide per 100,000, 1.8 deaths per 100,000, the second lowest in the US. We have the 6th strongest gun laws, and the only state that bars purchases by people with outstanding warrants and requires secure storage for any firearm not in the owner's immediate control. And Mass has the 2nd lowest rate of gun ownership in the country. So there's a correlation, I think, between less guns equals less deaths. Lastly, again, there's 1,000 ways for you to get involved with moms, everywhere from canvassing to phone banking to helping us with our data. But we did have some victories. It's not all sad news. Throughout the 2020 session, state lawmakers and governors enacted at least 51 gun safety laws and blocked 95% of the gun lobby's agenda. President Biden signed into law the first major gun safety bill in 25 years, and the U.S. House passed the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act to address the urgent and deadly threats that white supremacy and far-right extremists poses to our nation, especially when combined with easy access to guns. We have a program called Demand a Seat, which trains our volunteers to run for office or to work on campaigns. 9 Moms Demand Action volunteers won primary elections up and down the ballot this past year in 4 states. And finally, we didn't have an alcohol, tobacco, and firearm director for 7 years. The gun lobby didn't really want that oversight. But President Biden finally appointed Steve Dettelbach, which means we finally have oversight of gun dealers. And just one last thing, if you're interested in learning more about the history of guns in our country, I recommend a few free podcasts. One is actually by The Trace in conjunction with Boston's BUR, and it's called The Gun Machine, how America was forged by the gun industry. And then the New York Times has a podcast, The Daily, and there's The Secret History of Gun Rights and Why Polling on Gun Control Gets It Wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was awesome. That was a lot of information. It was great. Okay. Emily, welcome. Our youth have taken a leading role in gun safety, and your organization, March for Our Lives, has challenged us to stand up, speak out, and work to elect morally just leaders, regardless of party affiliation. Please tell us about March for Our Lives and how young people are leading the way and how they are identifying and supporting candidates for office.
Absolutely. Hi. Thank you. Thanks so much. March for Our Lives, as we talked about earlier, was founded in 2018 in wake of the tragic Parkland shooting, founded by students and survivors of that shooting, one of them being David is one of our founders. And after that, the students gathered together and were like, what can we do? It was founded on feelings of anger and disgust and confusion with how can we sit by and continue to be gunned down in our schools and public spaces and have elected officials that do nothing. And so they organized the march in 2018, and that march is one of the largest in American history of public protests and organized marches ever. And we saw 880 sister marches, not just nationally, but globally in response to that. And that was a statistical tipping point for gun control advocacy and gun reform in the country. It was something we'd never seen before in response. And that's something when I talk to others and we talk about, the big question of, well, what can this do? And what does organizing do? And what does coming together in your community do? It's symbolic, but it also evokes change, because that was a statistical tipping point. After that and up until now, we've seen a response of over 250 state legislator laws that have been in response to those efforts in 2018 and beyond. In 2022, last May, the community of Uvalde suffered from the murder at Robb Elementary School. March for Our Lives came together in June and did a response of a national march, again with over 400 sister marches nationally to that too. And after that, we had the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was the first piece of federal legislation in over 30 years. So when people say, what does it do when you gather, we have evidence of what we can do, especially when it comes to having young people at the table. Referring back to the question posed, young people are on the front lines of this issue. We uniquely and disproportionately are affected by gun violence every single day. And that's also a disproportionate issue for Black and brown communities specifically, for queer folks specifically. And so what we can do is continue to have survivors and young people of color at the tables, not just at the tables, but guiding these conversations and leading the change. And so what March for Our Lives did is we elected one of our alum as the first Gen Z congressperson ever. And and that's someone who, as a Gen Z person, has the unique perspective of what it's like to be on the forefront of this issue. And we need people like that to be able to understand how we can tackle this issue in a way that is comprehensive and strategic. And that's why March for Our Lives was also the first organization to publicly call about the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in 2019, and have been supported by our partners ever since. And so that was one of the biggest wins, I would say, in a long time, but very specifically in the past year, because we look back and we have never had this crisis tackled in a way that is federally funded with federal resources and with a person that can specifically marshal joining together agencies nationally and the federal funding that we need, where their specific job is just to be able to handle this crisis, because that is something that this country has needed for a very long time. And so that's a big win that we've been able to see in response to the organizing on the ground. In April of this past year, we saw the tragic murders happen at the Covenant School in Nashville. And we had, I would say, over 7,000 students walk out in response to that, to their state capitol, and demand that their leaders take change. And we saw later in the summer, especially in a very red state, of Tennessee, they called a special session to talk about what we can do about gun safety there. And I live in a state of Massachusetts where we have the lowest gun death rates in the country. But proposing laws like these are things that states across the country see this happen, and they see what change can do, and they follow suit. We see in California and Massachusetts that we are the leading states and the champions in this legislatively, but when we look at all of our other states across the country, we don't see that as much. And being the leaders in the change of this means that we need to continuously modernize our laws, because as our guns become more dangerous, we need to respond to that accurately. And that's something that we've been able to do with this gun safety package. In California, a very similar, I believe it's SB 2 and AB 28. They have a very similar package that they just passed last month, similar to ours in Mass. And they are also the champions in this fight. So we have to continue to modernize our laws as guns continue to change and guns continue to modernize. And we need to continue to have these conversations in our communities and with our community members. And to build off of that onto the question posed, young people have been organizing for a very long time, but have come to a tipping point like we did in 2018, where we're no longer going to stand by and allow for this to happen. And that's why we've been electing people into Congress, organizing at our state capitals, and organizing and protesting in ways where people can't look away, and our Congress people and our elected officials can't ignore this any longer. And so continuously organizing in your communities, having conversations with each other, and also advocating for not just your state of Massachusetts, but advocating nationally for states that need our help so desperately. When we talk about the response of the laws that were implemented after Parkland, those are actively trying to be overturned right now. And so we need all hands on deck when it comes to gun violence prevention, because while we have champion states in the fight right now, and we're continuously have awesome elected officials who are working really hard to continue to have those strong, we see across the country the crumbling of our democracy in so many different ways. And so continuously having spaces where we have awesome panels like these and we continue conversations is how we continue to pioneer the change. Young people are not stepping down anytime soon. In fact, we're just getting started. And we saw in 2022 with the midterm election, we were the largest generation to turn out and vote. And that's because these issues, that's because these issues are, yes, uniquely American and uniquely youth-focused. I mean, this is our future that we need to rebuild together. And so being able to work across the aisle, being able to work with generations above us, and being able to have people in office that represent us accurately and are one of us is exactly what we need. I mean, we look at Maxwell Frost, our first Gen Z congressperson. He's one of the people that helped us put together the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. He's been working with that since 2019, and he was able to become elected and work on the bill to get that on the table. And then uplifting survivor stories is one of the biggest things that gun violence prevention orgs like us center our work around, because just like being a young person, there's nobody that knows a greater tragedy than a survivor or a victim of gun violence. And so we know the solutions here, but we need people to work together with us on that. In the state of Texas, we see a mother, Kimberly Mata Rubio, whose daughter was killed in Uvalde. And she's currently now running for, I believe, mayor of local office in Uvalde, because nobody knows the greater tragedy than her. And nobody knows the greater tragedies of burying a loved one or being able to talk about what that's like in a way that we can never understand than somebody that's gone through it. And so all of these laws that we've talked about, all of these big wins, they have been forged by survivors and by young people and people of color that have had to suffer in their communities from this for far too long. In Highland Park, we saw the communities come together and put together the assault weapons ban, or assault weapons ban style for the state of Illinois, as one of 6 to 7 states, just like Mass, that was able to implement that. And that was in the wake of tragedy as well. And we don't want to work just in the wake of tragedy, right? Because everyday gun violence happens. And we have over 500 mass shootings that have happened in the year of 2023. And those don't make headlines. Like, we have a small percentage of these mass shootings that make the headlines, but everyday gun violence is happening as we're speaking right now. And so it's very important for us to continuously work together on this issue, because there are so many stories and so many tragedies that happen every day that go unnoticed. And so being able to center our work around survivors, around people that are on the ground experiencing this every single day, because there's no part of the country that goes untouched by gun violence. So being able to center those stories and work together with young people and communities that need that is one of the best ways we can do that. So to leave it on the note there, what you can do is organize in your community, work with your local chapters of gun violence prevention orgs like MDA and March for Our Lives. You can talk to your family and friends that are unsure about how they can help and who they can support, because being able to support champions in the fight that are gun safety advocates is one of the biggest ways that we can implement policy. And then lending your hand nationally, like we mentioned earlier. I mean, we are lucky to live in a state where we have the lowest gun deaths. And while that's not zero and we continuously need to work at it, we're seeing that crumbling of democracy happen nationally in so many different ways, because gun violence is a racial justice issue. It's a white supremacy systemic issue. It's so many other things connected together. And so we need to look at gun violence in a holistic way of how we can end it. And obviously work together with your local orgs and implement local change as well.
That's what the future looks like.
That's right. That's right. If anyone else has a question, please hand it in to this woman here, and we will continue. I just wanted to ask a question as we close up this part of the portion. Representative Decker, could you tell us how you felt when you were looking up into the balcony and seeing all those red and orange T-shirts on the day that you were passing this law or this bill, and all the young people?
Yeah, I think actually I'm going to go back to 11 years ago when I testified on my red flag bill, which I filed at the request of working with a student who was in college in my district. So again, you know, often legislators, we don't always choose the issues we work on. Sometimes they choose us, particularly when we're willing to listen. And in this case, I was willing to listen to a young person who I don't even think was registered to vote in my district. So filed that bill. When I testified, I had never testified on any of these common sense gun ownership laws. I left, got home that night, and found my social media blowing me up. There were videos about me, there were hateful things, there were threats. I was in complete panic, complete anxiety. Called my police commissioner, who at that time was brand new, and I just happened to have had lunch with him that day. And then I called John Rosenthal, who was at the hearing that day. And just, so first to say, having somebody who actually has been in the trenches for decades, John's hands on national laws as well as Massachusetts laws have just been decades in the making before there were the red shirts and the orange shirts. And so having, being able to call John and ask, what is this, what's going on, what did I do, how did I trigger this? I didn't realize at the time that because I tried to equate a gun license and a driver's license, and I used the word privilege, that I was setting off this whole group of people referred to as a 2A folks. Didn't even, like, none of that was in my vocabulary. Then I will tell you, I had a couple of women from Moms Demand Action who reached out to me and asked to have coffee with me in Cambridge right after this happened because they saw what was going on. Having them reach out to me was everything. Talking to other moms who understood, like, I was trying to put this in context, what is happening here? So then lobbying for this bill, and again, I just have to go back and credit, like, I get to sit up here on stage, but it is not just me. It is really the moral leadership of who then was Speaker DeLeo and now Speaker Mariano, who've made this a priority. But having a sea of red t-shirts, of orange t-shirts, of young people 11 years ago who were not even 11 years ago, 2018 was my red flag. I'm thinking of we were first elected, but in 2018, having them alongside me, in front of me, behind me, around me, that was a sense of, I'm not in this alone. And I think that's the point of organizations like March for Our Lives, Stop Handgun Violence, Moms Demand Action, is that we're not in this alone, and finding a community of people, because really the MO, and again, those who oppose this, I want to be very clear, the opposition is not from the majority of gun owners, it's from the NRA who represent gun manufacturers. Every single time there's been a mass shooting, their profits and their sales have skyrocketed. So just let's not forget that, because it's so important to not generalize around gun owners. It is the gun manufacturers who make a shitload of money at the expense of the blood and the death and the lives that we lose every day in this country. So, in short, it's to be part of community and to be able to turn to people, people like John who've been in it for decades, and then for so many other new advocates and quite honestly pissed off moms who are tired of prayers and thoughts and fear. Many of you saw that video. I saw that video this summer. David had showed it to me, and just watching it again, I was crying, and I'm angry and crying. And so remember, it's not inevitable. Death at the movie theater, at the grocery store, at your mosque, at your shul, at your church, at a nightclub, at a restaurant, at an outdoor concert, it's not inevitable. It's a uniquely American problem that we can actually solve.
Thank you. Okay, we have some questions, and this one might be a difficult one to start with, but let's try it. The 451, I think it's 351 actually, police chiefs in Massachusetts unanimously oppose Bill 4139. Why would you ignore and reject their knowledge and experience about effectively lessening gun violence?
I'd love to take a shot at that.
Okay, thank you, John.
Pun intended. I thought when you said 441, you were going to go to Las Vegas, because that's how many people were shot at a country music festival in Las Vegas in minutes. 441 people shot. 850 sent to the hospital. Congress didn't even notice. The fact, look, police chiefs, we issue them 13 to 17 rounds. Congress gives 30 to 100 round magazines to literally outgun police, because police die when they have to reload. So we're giving criminals, prohibited people, international terrorists come to the U.S. because they can't get these assault weapons in the Middle East. They can get them here in the U.S. without an ID or background check in 32 states and at 5,000 annual gun shows. Think about that. 32 states, including Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, Hamas can come to the U.S. and buy 1,000 AR-15s. And they have. And they've been caught shipping them out. They didn't get caught buying them at gun shows. And without any manufacturing standards, like David talked about, literally, U.S. companies and foreign companies can market guns to criminals. There's a 22 caliber firearm used at Fort Hood where military wear, military police wear body armor. That weapon is marketed. It's made by Herzl, a Belgian company. It is marketed as capable of penetrating 48 layers of soft body armor. That's why it was used on a military base. And get this one, there's a company in Tennessee called Barrett. They make a 50 caliber sniper rifle with an over a mile range. And their brochure online was capable of taking down an aircraft and telling you where to put the round. And Osama bin Laden bought 12 when he was fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. When you have no manufacturing and marketing standards, and you can't be sued thanks to Congress, imagine what these gun makers are capable of doing. So when police officers who are outgunned with assault weapons aren't supporting a bill that's going to make it harder for people to get assault weapons, it's insane. But it is not the majority of police officers. The mass chiefs have been taken over by, guys who are just, frankly, they're not who we worked with to get the last 4 bills passed. They were at the front of the line. They were at the front of the line back in 1994 when there was a federal ban on assault weapons supported by every major national police organization representing 450,000 officers. So this is just an anomaly because of horrific leadership at the big city chiefs or the major chiefs in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and as someone who had to take that vote, actually, not every police chief and commissioner actually opposes this. The organization opposed this, and let's be clear, what part do they oppose? As Speaker Mariano was very clear talking about, do they think people should just be able to make guns who aren't licensed so their officers are walking into dangerous places where they don't actually know if somebody has a gun? Of course they don't think that. Do they oppose expanding the ERPO law? They supported the ERPO law. I think this is a red herring here, and I think it goes exactly to what John says. They had the opportunity to actually engage prior to this bill coming out. The association, I want to be clear, because I'll tell you, my police commissioner never called me and told me that she opposed it. Part of this bill was written with me, with my former police commissioner. So there's a lot of politics playing here. So it's a red herring to actually even state that they all, I promise you, not every police commissioner opposes, but the fact that they wouldn't come out and talk about what parts of the bill they liked was they lost credibility in this for their association. But who didn't lose credibility are the police chiefs and the police commissioners every day who are actually every day get up in the face of harm and risk and loss of life, go out there and actually do their job to protect all of us. And they want us to continue passing laws that protect us and protect them. So I'm not buying into the notion that they all opposed it, because they didn't.
Okay. The next one is an important one. How are off-duty police officers accused of domestic abuse situations affected by ERPO?
I mean, the same way anybody is. If you think somebody in your home is, and in fact, I would say the ERPO law that we passed is even better, and I think it's why a lot of police commissioners and both major associations came out supporting this, right? So now it's not you, the police chief in a town, who knows that, your police officer who lives in another town and you're friends with that police chief. They don't have to worry about sort of that they're the person who are making that decision. This means that anyone who is in danger of hurting themselves or hurting someone else, right, which is often the moment when somebody chooses to leave their batterer, is the most dangerous time in which actually they will face violence, and in particular gun violence. So what ERPO does is it allows a lot of people, and we expanded this to now be providers and law enforcement, to go to a judge and to immediately be able to evaluate temporarily removing your ammunition and your guns for you. So it actually just makes it even safer.
And just to give a little bit more context, 32 states don't require background checks. So here in Massachusetts, if you want to own a firearm, you have to get licensed, and who knows you better than your local police chief? So, that is one way that we make the community safer, by having renewable licensing just like automobiles. And it's the police chiefs that are at the front lines.
We have, I'm going to use one last question. We haven't talked much about suicides tonight. And suicides account for more than half of the deaths cited, 57% in Massachusetts, according to this questioner. And, wants to know, has the new flag law, or red flag law, helped with this, since it's been law, I think 2014? And what can we do to make more people aware of the red flag process?
So I think two things. I think you heard two different statistics tonight, but to give you context, we've talked about 3.4% of the deaths for every 100,000 people in Massachusetts, and Rebecca talked about 1.6. The 3.4% combines both gun homicides and gun suicides. So that's an important, that almost half the deaths that occurred by gun violence are suicides. And the red flag law was actually really originally emerged as an issue around concern around suicide, right? That moment you have, there's so many people struggle with mental health. Most of us at some point in our lives will struggle with mental health, right? There will be a time, certainly a time in my life, a time in probably everyone who sits here in which you will struggle. The difference is you have a gun, right? It is almost inevitable, and there's statistics on this, right? And I won't try to quote them now, but it's almost inevitable that you will be successful. And so what the red flag does is to say, before that happens, let's get to a court, let's get to a judge, very quickly remove you from that. And so I do have statistics on how many ERPOs have actually been given out, but in terms of whether their relationship to suicide, I don't know. I do know that in Connecticut, and this will be one of the things that Massachusetts gets to do with its data, but in Connecticut, there was a study that showed that it was actually a very significant percentage that in fact did take guns away that were intended for suicide, with somebody who had suicide ideation and access to a gun. So this is an important law, and it's about saving lives and recognizing that even if you or someone you know is feeling at your lowest point and believing this is the moment where it no longer makes sense for you to be alive in this world, know that most people who don't have a lethal weapon in their hands and have support move beyond that to go on and continue living lives no longer feeling desperate and unworthy of living. It's a temporary moment, and we have tools and we have support and we have resources, but if you have that lethal weapon in your hand, then we lose the opportunity to save the life that you actually still want to live.
I just want to, so the statistics are, U.S. has 12 times the rate of other countries when it comes to suicide. Excuse me. Access to a gun triples the risk. Here it is. Without a gun, only 4% of attempts result in death, but it's 90% with a gun. And as you said, of those who don't succeed, I think it's upward in the high 80s where people they get the help they need and they don't try again. A gun closes that window within a 10-minute of ideation. It's awful. There's been a 42% increase in firearm suicides in young people over the past decade. But 33% of youth suicides have been prevented by safe storage laws.
I'd just like to say thank you so much. I thought everyone, no, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add on that ERPO's emergency risk protection orders are laws that are very unique and very important to this package of gun safety laws. They are unique because they unite our local agencies, like our police departments, with families that are concerned about their loved ones. And in states that don't have laws like these, I went to the state of Michigan when they were in the House and the Senate fighting to pass these laws this past March. And they had about, I would say, 11 to 12 families that went up and did oral hearings to beg their state to pass laws like these. And I spoke with a mother who, her daughter was mentally ill and a risk to herself and to others. And for over 2 years, this mother went to her local police department begging them to take away her weapons, begging them to take away her guns because her daughter was threatening herself and her loved ones every single week. And this mother was battling this, going over to her house every single day, checking in, doing the job that she wished that the power that the police department and her state was able to grant her. And every single time she went to speak to her local police, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. Eventually, unfortunately, this woman ended up murdering her boyfriend, her husband, or her boyfriend, her father, and her sibling. And these are stories that we don't hear when we're talking about laws here, but they happen and they exist in the state of Massachusetts because we have people that work alongside our elected officials to tell them this is what we need. And so we're lucky in the state of Massachusetts to have elected officials that are continuously working on laws like these. They are very important in the overall package of gun safety.
Elizabeth, I want to just, I'm sorry, I know you want to end this, but it's important to know, because I've talked a lot about what this bill is that we voted in. One last thing is we also closed the loopholes on what is considered an assault weapon. And just to say that we grandfathered anybody in who actually already had a gun that was configured in that way and who legally owned the gun. Remember, this bill has only been passed in the House of Representatives. Right. The Senate has not taken up this bill. The Senate had decided a year after we started after a year after we were doing our listening tour that they too decided wanted to do a bill. So I would just say is that I encourage you to call your state senator, ask them where the bill is, or ask them to consider actually acting on the House bill. So these are incredible, but we need to get a bill out of the legislature enacted. A bill voted on by the House doesn't change or help improve our safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a great evening, and I hope that you've all enjoyed and learned more about this important issue, and hopefully we'll be bringing this crisis to an end soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight.